Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I know that I'm always excited for these episodes, but it's very rare, incredibly rare, that I'm excited because I actually got to meet this podcast guest in person. And that is true of today's guest. She is incredible at what she does. She brings so much energy and passion to the world of business, also to life, and also especially to branding, which is her area of expertise. So I want to tell you about today's guest. Her name is Liz Lilly. She loves building brands. She cares deeply about how brands think strategically and how brands show up daily. We're going to talk about that so much. With over a decade of marketing and brand management experience, she's the founder and principal brand consultant at Lilly View, LLC. She helps clients as big as billion-dollar companies to clients as small as startups elevate their brand. Like any good brand consultant, she'll help you define why you're here, where you're going, and who you're talking to. She'll also help turn strategies into strong messaging. It's such a key part of what she does. We're going to talk about messaging in today's episode, but she's more than good. She makes the hardest parts of brand work feel fun and easy. She turns complicated concepts into sophisticated, simple, clear content. I know that these are big promises, so I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview today with Liz Lilly. All right, Liz, here we are. It feels weird that now we're being recorded for this conversation, but welcome to the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Thanks so much, Brian. It's so good to be here.
Heck yeah. And I didn't say it in the intro, but you are coming to us live from the great state of Vermont, back in New England, where I'm originally from. You and I have swapped places. You moved from Florida to Vermont, so welcome to your new digs. But fill in the gaps for listeners. Who the heck is Liz? How did you end up here?
Oh boy. Well, thanks, Brian. So what's my story? If I start from the very beginning, I was born in Ohio, grew up in Germany, grew up then in Minnesota, then spent a long time in Colorado. So that's where I got my bread and butter background and experience in core experience in brand management and brand equity, and what does good creative look like? What does bad creative look like? How do brands come to life every day? I was working for Vail Resorts for a long time, and loved it. Honestly, it was the dream job. And that took us into about the COVID period. And so there was a restructure. And so I had a period of time where after losing a position, it would, again, total restructure. It's okay. It's part of business. It's part of life. I had to think about, where do I want to take my expertise, my experience, my passion? Where do I want to take that next? And so after Vail Resorts, decided, you know what? I have family in Florida. I've got this startup bug in me from a history of startup experience and a history of entrepreneurship. Why don't I go and figure out what brand consulting could look like and go do it from a totally new state? So I flipped my core comfort zone on its head, location-wise, and going back to actually building my own thing. It's very hard to work on your own brand, even if you're brand consulting. So it was a step outside my comfort zone. But loved it. I grew a little community in Sarasota, Florida. I started to find clients. I started to find great projects. And so here I am a couple years into Lilly View, helping people identify what their benefit is. Who are they? Why are they here? And where are they going? And what benefit do they serve to their target audience? And so it's been a great trip. I'm really excited to keep on growing my business. And and then on a personal note, I'm back in Vermont. So this is a full circle, mountain to mountain story where I've done the West Coast and now I'm up in the Northeast. And I'm about 6 days into living here. So this is my first exciting experience, from a new desk and from a new space. Happy to be here.
Liz, I love the fact that you've already applied some branding messaging to your story as well. Mountain to mountain. That is awesome. I love that you've already crafted that narrative as far as your story goes. And listeners, I want to tease you because obviously I've had the pleasure of getting coffee with Liz before she left the state of Florida. I actually think, you know how we talk about, like, colloquially, we have that phrase of like break bread with someone. For me, it's get coffee with someone. If I get coffee with someone, I feel that deep bond. And Liz, in your case, what I really like is not only your branding experience, but one thing that we're going to dive into for listeners towards the end of this episode is your entrepreneurial story as well. That's what I always love to say to listeners is you are one of us. You are a fellow entrepreneur, not only an expert in branding, but also you have your own entrepreneurial journey. So I'm excited to dig into all that. But I think the first place that we need to start is when we throw the B word around as much as we're going to today, branding. What is a brand? We have to start there. So I'm going to make this question even more loaded for you, Liz, because I know you're up to the task. So first things first, I want to hear your perspective on what exactly is a brand. And then layered onto that, I'm using something against you that we talked about in person, which is you and I previously talked about a brand doesn't show up on a profit and loss statement. So as we're growing our businesses, it's hard to sit down and say, hey, I'm looking to grow my business. I'm looking to increase my revenue. We can't necessarily point towards the ROI of a brand, but why is a brand so important, even if it doesn't come with that, profit and loss statement P&L that we can show as far as here's the ROI of it?
Yeah, tough questions. And really, it's the most basic question. What is brand? It's a very conceptual thing. And that's why when people throw around the brand word, sometimes people mean different things. I define it as a feeling. It's how do people think and feel about you and everything that surrounds that business identity. In every touch point, it is what will people think and feel, and how do people think and feel actually? And will that product or service that you're offering benefit the end consumer, the end customer, whoever you are talking to? And yeah, it's so hard to measure. It's not one of those things that's black and white, and plenty of experts way smarter than me have been really trying to figure out how to truly put a measurement of success to brand. But I believe a successful brand is just when you're clear and simple about what it is you do emotionally and rationally to benefit somebody else. Why does that matter? And it's often lost in features, is what I see a lot of times, where you talk about just the features of the product or the features of the service and what you think about internally when you talk about what your company might look and feel like, but actually what the person you're selling to, what the person you're trying to help has a totally different view of this. And so a good brand thinks about how your people think and feel ultimately. And it's a long-term game. It's a lot of little steps over a long time. It takes a vision, it takes a mission, it takes a position, it takes clarity and good leadership and understanding how to stay on track with that, again, vision, mission, position, clarity of who you are and why you're here and where you're going, what your benefit is at the end of the day. So hard to measure.
Yeah, for sure. I want to echo something there and really call it out for listeners because I think it's such an important takeaway. And I know that I personally struggled with this big time, especially in my early 20s, is that when I think about my brand, I would think about, big businesses, and I would say, well, what does their brand look and feel like? Because, we can always replicate. We can always try to duplicate things that other companies are doing, successful companies are doing, but then make it our own. And I remember in my early 20s, I flew to Orlando to a business conference, and I heard a Disney executive talking about how has Disney built their brand, what brands out there are stronger than Disney? We see Mickey Mouse, and it evokes so much feeling for all of us. And so what he talked about was being customer-centric. He said, when you check into a Disney hotel, our workflow doesn't look like, okay, the front desk employee checks them in this system, and then housekeeping gets this notification. He said, we map it entirely out from the customer's experience. So they will, when they build their workflows, they will walk the floor of the hotel and say, as a customer, what do I experience at this step? So it is that customer-centered answer that I really hear behind the way that you talk about it, because when you're talking about the emotions, the feelings that people are getting, that's for the customer. So I want to call that out for listeners, is that listen to what Liz is saying there, because that's the important thing. She didn't start talking about all the things we must do as business owners. She started talking about the things we must do for our clients. And on that topic, Liz, when I talk about hotels, it's easy. It's easy to have an awesome experience, have the walls all decorated. What about for all of us online business owners? And I know for you, so much of your business is you're remote. You can work with anyone. How do we bring that stuff onto or into the online business space?
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge because, again, my core experience was with Vail Resorts. And so you bring up Disney. Vail Resorts is the ski industry of kind of like Disney. And so it was truly walk in the ski boots and walk in the snowboard boots of the friends and families who are there to visit your experience. And it was truly... how do we bring our rarefied experiences to life? What does legendary attention to detail look like? And it was amazing to put yourself in the shoes of your guests, put yourself in the shoes of your customer, put yourself in the shoes of your consumer. I think digitally, there are still just as many, if not more, touch points to keep in mind. And it's realizing where is your perception building digitally. And it's often in conversations. It's often in comments and threads. It's also in the dark social space of true iMessage and WhatsApp chats and places where you might not see it. So it is about developing relationships digitally and seeing what publicly is being put out there and what privately you might be able to help influence. How can you solicit feedback? How can you solicit opportunities to just get to know your audience, get to know your actual customers, get to actually know your consumers, and realize that touch points are everywhere and perception is so hard to manage, but consistency is key in everywhere that you are putting your brand out there. And it's everything from awareness at the top of the classic funnel all the way through to the consideration pieces of how people are getting to know you and learn about what benefit you do have, and ultimately your transaction. There are brand touch points through the entire experience. Plus, then after they've actually purchased your product or service, there's the follow-ups. And it's a cycle, it's a journey. And if you don't see opportunity to see where your brand's actually coming to life, you're not maybe looking as hard as you should be. It's out there, whether or not you understand it or see it. So it's about being very proactive and active in the space in terms of just owning your brand and not letting your brand be defined in a way that isn't the narrative you want to be putting out there.
Yeah, Liz, I am going to call this out because I think it's huge for listeners to understand and also embrace. And I want to go deeper here is you talk about brand touch points. Every single thing is a brand touch point. And I don't think any of us are as intentional as we could and should be when it comes to asking ourselves, what are all my brand touch points? It starts with an ad. If you're advertising, starts with social media, starts with your emails. It's something that, and Liz, I'm going to call this out. Kudos to Andrew, who's on the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur team, is that you said it when we met up. You said, gosh, you and Andrew, like you guys sound alike. I love the energy that you guys have. That's a very intentional part of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast experience is I'm very energetic. There's nothing I can do to stop that. If you listen to an episode, everyone knows that. If you then email our team and you get a blasé email response, it's going to feel off brand for you. You're going to be like, well, what the heck is going on? So everybody on the team, energy is a core part of our brand. We are excited about entrepreneurship, but that's just one example. That's just using our words, our written words in this case. Talk to us about those brand touch points. So email is obviously one that I do pay a lot of attention to. What are some of those other brand touch points? And other than just the words that we choose or the energy that we put into it, how is our brand being felt? How is it being seen and experienced? Give us some examples of those brand touch points.
Yeah, like the emails, I think of those as marketing channels and a very, very clear and critical brand touch point. Every communication that you're putting out there, and down to the detail too, down to your subject line. If, an average of 20% of people, you might have it at a higher open rate, but let's say 20% of your people open your email, that means that 80% are just seeing your subject line. So remembering that there's micro points within even just an email to remember that that's where people are getting familiar with who you are. But so stepping back, then there's other channels. You've got email, you've got your website, very critical. You've got your banner ads if you want to get out there. You've got your radio, TV, you've got YouTube, you've got social media conglomerate of channels to work with, and remembering that every channel has 100+ touch points within that you need to keep in mind, and remember that pictures say 1,000 words too. What you're visually presenting needs to be capturing of who you are and why you're here. Aesthetically, it needs to be, if you're putting a message on there, it's got to be straight and to the point. Do not keep it, so verbose that people lose the message within the visual, and it's too complicated to see what the point of it is. And remember that your content and creative is you're not going to always know where people are in their journey of actually becoming a customer or consumer. But try to remember if they're brand new and they don't even know your name, they don't even know who you are. Remember that they need an introduction and they need to be sold and inspired by what you're doing. All the way through to consideration, you need to be helping them through the journey of who are the other competitors? Why do you stand out? What makes you different? What makes you special? And then into conversion, you got to think about how is your brand ultimately trying to offer you the deal, not necessarily really push you, but remember that you're still selling and you're selling a benefit at the end of the day. There's lots of touch points is what I'm getting at. There's not really a clear list, I guess I could say, of all of the digital opportunities, but just remember, I'm going to add one more thing. There are also unforeseen touch points with your employee base. They're your brand advocates and your best brand champions, where if your employees, like you said, Andrew, and on your team, if they're not representing your brand in the most appropriate, best possible way, that's a missed opportunity. Your employees are the best possible people to get on board with championing your business and championing your vision and mission, position, again, why you're here and where you're going. So don't forget about your supply chain. Don't forget about the people on your team who sit right next to you. And amazingly, that takes work. It takes leadership to continue to reinforce your key messages and your key points, just to keep a thread of consistency with your ultimate base.
Yeah, Liz, so much goodness in what you just shared with us. I want to call out for listeners something that's really important that you said, which is you never know where the other person is at in their journey of getting to know you. And so it's probably, I've never shared this publicly. This is the first time I'm saying it out loud, but the best piece of advice that I got when I started my podcast all the way back in 2016 was someone, and I wish I could remember who it was. I was talking to so many people back then looking for advice, and someone back then told me, imagine that every single episode that you record, that could be the first episode that someone hears. And so that was a challenge that I accepted since day one, is I was like, gosh, every episode has to be good. I can have 0 average episodes. So it's something that I've always worked towards. But Liz, I want to ask you this. I've actually never asked a branding expert this. And as you were talking about all these different touch points, then you introduce the complexity of having your team carry all this stuff forward. In my head, I was like, well, shoot, how are we supposed to do this? How are we supposed to do this consistently? You've worked with companies, you've helped them set up their brands. How do you ensure that that brand then lives on, that brand comes to life? Is it a branding guideline book? Is it, an employee handbook that says, here's exactly what we stand for? Those are words on a paper. How do we bring this stuff to life?
Yeah. It's so important. So I'll tell you what it isn't. It's not a 37-page brand guide. I mean, it may be a good starting point, but how many people do you know love flipping through that book every single day, or every Monday of their week, they're flipping through those pages? They don't, is the truth. So I really help my clients figure out, everything can be put into like 6 words, maybe 10 words of why it is you're here and where it is you're going. And it is giving your customers and your clients those tools to to express that consistently. It might be every meeting, especially at the beginning, while you're going through a rebrand, or while you're going through such a startup space where nobody really knows how to express who you are. But repetition is your friend when you're building a brand, and when you're building that consistent messaging. And so distilling who you are and why you're here is something that I offer my clients to about 6 words in terms of a vision, 6 words in terms of a mission. And I mean, give or take, don't hold me to that. Sometimes I use 7 or 8, but the point is it can be distilled in a way that you can repeat with confidence, so that your employees can then take that, and when they're managers, when they're leaders, they can take that message and bring that to every meeting that they're talking to their teams about, and so on and so forth. And that internal dialogue of your direction, of your North Star, and also why you get out of bed every day to do what you're doing and working so hard on, it becomes so much stronger when you get this network of people to believe in what you're doing, and it just amplifies your brand. And so there is no one brand owner, is one other takeaway I could offer in this little explanation. It truly is a team effort, and I come from a lot of team expertise and loving collaboration, loving team development. So with that, there's no one brand owner, is my philosophy. You have to make it easy for other people to repeat.
Yeah, I love that perspective. Also, my brain is running a million miles a minute, because in my head, I'm also just thinking to myself, well, then also I would love for my customers to be my brand ambassadors as well. And that's something that when we host monthly office hours here at Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur, I love interacting with listeners. When guests come on and they're like, what are your listeners like? I love giving them real life stories of, hey, this is what this listener's working on. This is what this listener got from this one guest one time, and here's what their business is doing. Talk to us about ways that we can tap into that, whether it's with our employees, whether it's with our clients. Give us some of those real life examples that you really love of, hey, here's how we strategize, because Liz, I know how strategic you are in all this, but here's how we strategized it, and then here's how it came to life. And even going beyond just the customers and the employees, I also want to hear about those real life stories of the brand touch points, all those little things that you think about, because I think that's something that is such one of your strengths that I don't know if it comes naturally to you if you worked on it, but your attention to detail of all those little things that make a brand. I want to hear examples of those, because let's face it, we're all going to view those stories and examples through our own lenses, and it's going to inspire us to say, whoa, what are those corners, those dark corners of our businesses that we haven't shined a light on? Maybe we haven't even cleaned it up. Maybe there's some cobwebs there that I want to start thinking about more intentionally.
Yeah. And you want to think digitally first, don't you?
Give us either, Liz. I'll take anything and everything. Because the truth is, I do think we all will listen to it for our own needs.
Yeah. I'm gonna give one fun example of a recent client that I worked with. And they're based in Sarasota. They just opened up a dog bar. And it was so much fun to work with this team. They just are so passionate through the roof about building a space to be together. And so I said, great, there's so much energy behind that. And by the way, I have a dog in the background in case you hear a weird noise. I think she's throwing up actually right now. Oh, honey.
I was going to say, that doesn't sound great, Liz.
Honey. Oh, pal. It's not a big mess. I'll clean it up in a little bit.
We're making podcast history right here in real time.
Oh, pal. I think it was the salmon skin, maybe. She'll be okay. She's a tough trooper. So the dog bar that I got to work with, they're high energy, very passionate people. And I had to help them realize in a short statement, why are they here, where they're going? And I know I've said that a lot of times. So what does that actually mean? I help them work through their statement that they want to be the city's doggiest space to hang out. And it's one of those things where, what does it mean to be doggy? What is doggiest? And so I had to come up with a definition behind that. And that's the creative detail of branding. And what does it mean to be doggiest? It means that you are caring about your dogs, but you're also determined and you're dogged. And that was a play on words a little bit. The space, it's a clear, big open area, inside, outside, that we needed to incorporate, because it's important to have space to run around. It's important to have space to chill out. It was a multifaceted area. And then the hangout part was, there's couches, there's bar seats, there's tables for dining. It was a whole mixture of things. But I paired that vision statement with a mission that captured the essence of why they're here and what gets them out of bed every day. And that was to inspire happy friendships. And ultimately, I had to help them see that, yes, the dogs are awesome. The dogs are incredible to get to be at a bar with and hang out. And it's not a new idea necessarily, but the thing that they can remember every single day is that they're here to help friendships develop, help connection really happen. And I think that's so important today, to have places to go and organically meet people. It's not enough to just, meet people online necessarily. We are in a world where it's time to get back out there and time to get out and re-engage with each other. And it's something that's where relationships happen. That's where true happiness comes from. So for them to be able to wake up every day and say, I'm here to inspire happy friendships. It's between people. It's between people and their dogs. It's between dogs and dogs. But every day, remember that. And so one of the touch points, it was a wall that we had to think about, and we had to think about how to articulate their story and remember the camaraderie and that it took to get to the space of where they landed. And so we had to figure out, how do we use this big open space as an entrance message for patrons to come and see. So we worked through a narrative. We worked through how to articulate that essence in a really fun and exciting way. I think I used a couple rhymes, and I think we used a couple of just play on words, because it's got to be light and happy and fun. And we had to incorporate the values that we worked through too in that space. So digitally, you're going to find that again on your website. It's as little as what your homepage hero says. What's that top part of the screen going to show? It's all the way through to what's your app maybe looking like. It's where are you texting your customers and patrons, and what's your tone in those spaces? Don't forget about those sorts of things. Don't just continue to reach out to people and not give it a second thought of, is there a special is there a way that I can make this better for the person that I'm communicating with, and putting yourself in their shoes? How are they going to receive this message? Is this my intention? Is my intention going to be received?
Liz, I feel like you're setting such a high barometer of success for us with that example, because you had thought of so many things with this doggy pub. And so when I think about that, where my head goes is I'm just like, there are so many aspects of it, both visually, but also really what stands out is the strategy part. Is like layered beneath all of this is that strong intention that you set forward for them. A big part of that intention is obviously the messaging. It's the story. You keep saying it's the mission. It's all of that. And for all of us as entrepreneurs, and a heck of a lot of listeners are solopreneurs, I'm wondering, where the heck do we start? What does this actually look like? Do we sit down and with ourselves, with our friends and family, and we start throwing words out there on Post-it notes? Do we hop in ChatGPT and ask it for ideas of brainstorming with us? Obviously, we can hire an expert like you. There's so many different options, but what is the actual process of doing this? Being this intentional about our brand, what does that look like?
Yeah. It's thinking about it every single day, definitely, and seeing how your definition sits with you. So, what I'll do with my clients is we'll get together and we'll talk about the context of where they sit in their competitive space, in their competitive landscape, based on how far and wide do they want to go, and what in the next 5 years could you see yourself doing for your end consumer, your end customer. So it comes to just talking about why it is you're here. What gets you out of bed every day? What's going to inspire you to keep doing this on the best days and the worst days of your entrepreneurship experience? Because you need your brand to also help champion you through everything good and everything that might not be so good. And articulating what your vision is going to look like. Again, what's your North Star? Where are you trying to go? What's the context? Are you trying to be the world's best, or are you trying to be the city's best, or are you trying to be the email's best, SaaS service? I don't know exactly where that example might look like, but it is about spitballing, brainstorming, putting thoughts out there, and whatever means is best for you. It might be ChatGPT. I love using it as my assistant to get me started, and I bounce ideas off of it all the time. But ultimately, it's got to be your own words. It's got to be something that gives you confidence, and that's your barometer of success. Does it instill confidence in what you're doing every day in a way that you're proud of? You're proud to represent, and you are proud to tell your teammates, your family, your friends, and strangers, here's what I'm doing, and here's why I think I can help you. Put it on Post-it notes. Jot it down into a journal. Nobody has to see that necessarily. And ultimately, what I do with my clients is I put it into a very short deck. It's 10 pages or less always, and each page is simple. It's distilled as much as it possibly can be to help us keep on track. So it's a 6-word vision statement is one page. It's a 6-word mission page. It's maybe a 10-word position space of reminding yourself of your context. Remind yourself of what's your unique differentiator. What makes you stand out compared to everyone else that your customers and consumers might be shopping through and considering through their process. And then I'll write a very short paragraph on who your target audience is. We'll come up with 3 values with quick titles so that you can remember those 3 values as often as you need to, and bring your brand to life every day as your checkpoint system. And then last but not least, write a short bio. What's your about us narrative in 50 words or less? How would you describe this to somebody who knows nothing about you? And that's a bit of my secret sauce. That's how I help my clients position why they're here, where they're going, and give them a basic tool to flip through on a daily basis on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, whatever makes the most sense. But remember that repetition is your friend. So you can't look at your brand too much. And if it doesn't inspire you, if it doesn't give you confidence, if it doesn't help you make decisions faster and easier and better, it's not quite right. And it's okay to keep iterating off of it, but ultimately get to that point of 80% perfection and run with it and let it lead you and let it lead your team to where you want to go.
Listeners, Liz just dropped so much homework on us right then and there, revealing her entire process in deliverables. Liz, I love that overview that you gave to us. And I know there's so much special sauce that goes into all of the different components that you shared with us. But one thing I really want to call out for listeners in that answer that you just gave us is your brand also serves yourself. For me, the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur brand is something, Liz, you nailed it because you're a fellow entrepreneur. We all have those down days. We all have those days where we're just like, should I really record another episode? Like, does anyone really want to listen to me? And the reality is I get excited because I know what our mission is. So Liz, I love the fact that you called that out. I don't think I've ever heard anyone point that out when it comes to a brand, is how internally excited that it should get you. It should inspire you. And if it's not doing that for you, it's not going to do that for other people. So really good insights there. Liz, as we come towards the end of this interview, I teased to listeners that I want to talk about your own entrepreneurial journey as well. But the reality is, I don't want to not hear you talk about branding. So in my head, I'm just like, we could probably wrap the two in the same, because in my head, I want to go back to your first few clients, Liz. When you left Colorado, you left Vail Resorts, you came back to Florida, you're looking for your first few clients. And what goes through my head is picturing Liz doing that is I'm just like, you didn't have a brand. You were a solopreneur. I remember when I was in my early 20s, a large part of me when I was writing my website copy is I was like, should I write we? Is it we or is it me? Or like, I didn't even know any of those things. We don't have a brand when we just start out. Talk to us about that process. And actually, I'm sure part of it we've all learned is that you don't need a fully fleshed out brand to start getting clients. So I think that that's going to be part of your story. But Liz, walk us through that. When you were getting your first few clients, how were you representing yourself? What did you stand for at that time? And how has it evolved as your entrepreneurial journey has progressed?
Yeah. Oh, what was it like? It's a bit of a blur, it seems like, but I leaned into what I know about my experience and what I really valued about my time at Vail Resorts and where my energy came from every day. And ultimately, it came from distilling very complicated concepts into simple words. And I really love that superpower that I get to bring to people. And so, no, I didn't have a full brand outline for myself. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this, like, it's very hard to work on your own brand compared to helping other people work on their brand. It's totally different mindset. But nonetheless, I think I just went in knowing that I had something I had energy around, I had passion around, I knew how to do it. I had experience and expertise to offer people. And so my first couple of clients were in sports and an athletic company based in Tampa, which was incredible to position for growth and position it for strategic thinking in terms of where do they see themselves going? How far do they want to be in the world and in their area? And so from there, it was iterating off of getting that client to figure out, how do you bring this thing to life? What is the marketing strategy? Working through growth analysis, opportunities, and things of that nature. But once you have your position, things get faster. Things get easier and clearer. So what I would advise, though, is that if you don't have that position, you don't have that clarity yet, that's okay. You're only missing the opportunity of speed and confidence, but you will feel it out as you get out there, as you get networking, as you start talking about what you're doing to your friends and your family and your general digital network. Go join a cohort on LinkedIn and message somebody and say, hey, I really like what you're doing. Could we connect? Could we chat for 15 minutes on video? Whatever it might be, and just continue to ask questions and be curious and let them ask you, what is it that you're struggling with? How can I help you? And see what comes out of your mouth, see what kind of comes to play, because as I said, I'm only a couple years in this, so I'm still iterating off of what's my actual distilled version of what am I doing with Lilly View, and that's okay. But through every conversation, you get a little bit more confidence, and to the point where you feel like you can put it in writing. That's going to expedite everything else that you're doing. And so look forward to that chance, but don't put the pressure on yourself to have it all figured out before you get started. It's truly, ultimately, just talk to people, and people will reflect what they see, and you get to decide whether or not that is right for what you're trying to express. Is that your intention? Did they say back to me what I wanted them to hear about me, or do I need to flip my narrative and how I communicate? So you'll learn through that process, and that process is great. So I'm a big process-driven person too, and so that's what I would advise on. Just get started, just talk to people, and see where that's going to land you. But don't let not having a brand hold you up.
Heck yes. I love the fact that you called out that it is going to be an iterative and evolving process right out of the gates, and probably forever. I'm sure that the Targets of the world, the Nikes of the world, Target's an especially potent example right now, I guess, where they're always sitting down, going back to the drawing board and reassessing what are the decisions that we're making as a brand? How do we want to show up in the world? And Liz, you're right. For all of us, especially on a small scale, is that every conversation has the potential to form and shape your brand. Every single time that you talk about it has the potential to give you fresh insight. So I love how much you call out that it is an iterative process. Liz, as we come towards the end of this interview, first things first, I'm going to, spoiler alert for all you listeners. Liz, I don't know if you know what this is. Listeners do. I'm definitely going to invite you back for an Action Saturday episode, because I know that we're only scratching the tip of the iceberg for all the stuff that you're sharing with us here today. But as we do come towards the end, typically I give guests the hardest question, which is to wrap all these things up into a pretty little bow. And I'm going to give you 2 hard questions along those lines to wrap up today's session. The first thing is, you've mentioned, and I love how transparent you are about it and how much you embrace it. You fully own it and step into it of, hey, I'm figuring this stuff out for myself. So from an entrepreneurial perspective, I'd love to hear your best advice. If we could have saved you 2 years of learning, which we have the opportunity to do with listeners right here, right now, what's something that you realized 2 years into your entrepreneurial journey that you wish you knew sooner, that you think every entrepreneur should take on board as quickly as possible?
In a soundbite. Know your strengths and believe in what those strengths can do for yourself and for the people that you're going to work with. And I think for me, I've learned along the way that sometimes strengths are a double-edged sword, where they also have a second side to them of opportunities or things to watch out for. But I find so much confidence in myself when I get to think about that and wake up and realize, oh, I am very curious. I love asking questions. I love to go through processes of discovery. I am determined as hell. I love to put my mindset to a goal and achieve something together. And I'm very coachable. I love feedback, and I love offering feedback in kindness and a very, this is one of my favorite personally coined words, candorous ways. It's kindness with candor. So I've learned lean on my strengths a lot as I have gotten started, as I wake up every day to figure out what am I going to do? Am I going to go track down leads? Am I going to work on projects? Am I going to figure out my brand? It's been humbling to get into this space as a solopreneur with the aspiration of growing this into a small team in the future. So that's what I wish I knew at the very, very beginning, is to really reflect on what you're good at.
Yes, I love that advice, especially for people who are at the beginning, because at the beginning, the easier thing to focus on, I know it sounds like simplistic advice, but the easier thing to focus on is all of our deficiencies, because at the beginning, gosh, do we have millions of deficiencies, but I love that advice of focus on your strengths. So that was the first part of the tough question. And the second part, I think it's going to be a little bit easier for you to tie all this stuff into a pretty little bow for us. We talked about so many different aspects of branding, of building a brand, of your mission statement, of messaging, all of these different things. What's the one thing that you think listeners should do after hearing us talk about all these things? What's the one thing they should sit down and say, you know what? Here's one way that I can start being more intentional and more strategic about my brand.
What's one thing to be more intentional and strategic about your brand? What's your benefit? How are you helping? Just think about that. Ultimately, what are you selling to whoever you are selling it? And write it on a piece of paper. And you can put that benefit of, you save people time, you save people money, you help people feel inspired, you help people emotionally feel confident, whatever that benefit is that's really driving your business, write it next to a doodle, if you want, of who your person that you're talking to is. And look at that every single day, because who your John Does and your Jane Does are out there and what they care about every day is so easy to forget, especially when you're not interacting with them every single day in person. Hopefully you find ways to interact with them digitally or in person, but if you don't, make sure that you're thinking about them every single day. And I think that'll set you off on the right foot to not talk about you, but talk about how you help others.
Yes, right there is incredible advice that all of us can and must take to heart. So Liz, thank you so much for sharing that with us here today. And I know that listeners are going to be craving more of you. So the good news is, listeners, I'm going to invite Liz for an Action Saturday episode. Don't you worry. But Liz, I want to open up this stage for you to tell listeners where they can go to learn more about you, your business, and all the awesome stuff that you're up to.
Shucks, thanks so much. And for an update, the dog is just asleep, so she's okay right now, but I'll go take care of her right after this, after her throw up through this. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me at lillyview.com. And I've really enjoyed the opportunity to be here, Brian. Thanks for hosting, and I'm excited to return to a future opportunity.
Heck yes. I want to call something out for listeners. So listeners, you know the drill. The links that Liz just mentioned, lillyview.com. That's Lilly with 2 L's, so Lilly view.com. Definitely go check out her website. Find her on LinkedIn. The links are down below. But one thing I want to call out about your website, Liz, publicly, is that when people go to lillyview.com, you're a branding agency. That's what you do, is branding. But what they're going to see is you're going to be talking, your website literally talks about channels include paid media, email, web, social, blog. Those are things that you don't see on every other branding agency's website, because branding agencies want to talk about your brand aesthetic, your brand messaging, your brand this, your brand that. But you are also talking about and focusing on all of the different brand touch points. So I love how much what you talked about today plays into your approach to work, your approach to building a brand experience, something that people feel, see, all the emotions that come with it. So huge kudos to you, Liz. I'm a big fan of the work that you're doing out there. So listeners, check out the links wherever it is that you're tuning in to today's episode. Right on down the play button, you'll find those links. Otherwise, Liz, thank you so much for joining us today on the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Thanks, Brian.